Thank you. Here on the program on The Explainer tonight, we're so glad to be hosting U.S. Ambassador to Kenya, Ambassador Meg Whitman. Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for joining us on the program tonight. I'd like to begin by asking you about, the historic state visit by President Ruto to the United States. Let's just start by, upon his return, as you know, there was such heated debate in the country about the cost of his trip. Madam Ambassador, could you explain to us the policy and the protocol of a state visit such as the one we saw in May, and who takes care of the cost?
Yeah. So, first of all, we were delighted to host President Ruto on behalf of the Kenyan people and, frankly, by extension, all of Africa. This was the first head of state from an African country to get a state visit since 2008. So it was quite historic, and I think built on our 60 years of relationship between the United States and Kenya. And basically, the sort of protocol, if you will, is that the head of state and his entourage gets themselves to the United States, and then we take care of the expenses from there, and then they have to get themselves home. So that's how it works.
All right. So the whole kerfuffle about a jet and who was paying for it, you say it's Kenya that would take care of it?
This is not the United States of America. The Kenyan government has to take care of that.
Okay. All right. Thanks for clarifying that. Let's talk about the concessions and agreements, and there were quite a number of them that were made during that trip in the U.S., some from government to government, others with private sector. Who monitors the progress of this? Because there were quite a few deals that were done. And are there any updates you can give us with respect to some of those deals?
Well, you're right. It does need to be monitored because many things were completed, but then one has to actually do the work and get things done. And there were many elements. There was health cooperation, economic development, regional peace and security, a number of different things. And so actually here in Kenya, we work closely with the Kenyan government, the United States Embassy, to make sure those things are coming to fruition. So I have a meeting at least once every 2 weeks with my team, and then at least once every 3 weeks with the Kenyan team to monitor the progress and make sure that we're not dropping any balls. And I think the things that you can see that I did last week, a tour of companies here in Kenya that had received Development Finance Corp funds, Basigo, Mugo, a number of others that are employing Kenyans in very important industries. So those are the kinds of things that we work on, and I'm all about getting stuff done and follow through.
That's right. So, during the trip, it was talking about a freer and fairer society for both the United States and America. And there was, of course, like you said, it was historic for not just Kenya, but for Africa as well. But then, Madam Ambassador, just about a month after the visit to the United States, then clearly, while things were looking good at that time, there was trouble fomenting under the scenes here in the country. And so a month after that visit, during which issues of democracy and accountability were discussed, the country was plunged into protests. What are your thoughts around the events that took place in June and July in this country?
Well, the first thing I would say, I think Kenya is very lucky to have a vibrant, well-educated youth population who are very committed to a better future, a better economic future, and a better future for Kenya, and economic opportunity for all. And I think they deserve to be heard. And, we've been very clear that Kenya, in your constitution, has a right to peaceful assembly, a right to due process, and rule of law. Rule of law is very important for democracies. Democracies don't work without the rule of law. Also, accountability for the security forces who allegedly inflicted violence on the citizens, free speech, and a free press. And I think you all should be quite proud of what you've done in the last 2 months in terms of covering all of the issues. And I thought that interview that was done with the president at State House, I think on the 27th or 28th, was a remarkable exhibition of free press.
Yes, but yet, in the country, scores were killed. Abductions were carried out by masked men, some believed to have been security officials, because many of those who were abducted by masked officials were then found in police cells. Madam Ambassador, this doesn't augur well for democracy, does it?
Well, listen, first of all, the loss of life was tragic. And I think about that every day. I think over 60 Kenyans were killed. And we reject violence of any kind. Violence is never the answer. It seems like that happens all over the world today, but it is never the answer. And so democracy can be messy. But the good news is you have a very strong constitution that gives your citizens and the Gen Z rights to, as I said, to protest peacefully, to due process. And I think the Kenyan government has to continue to work to make sure that happens. Democracies are work in progress. Yeah. As you know from the United States, January 6th tells us that we are a work in progress. But, we all have to try for a more perfect union.
Yeah, indeed, it is a work in progress. And with respect to that, and I think the history that we've had with the United States and other members of the diplomatic community, in the wake of what happened in the last couple of months, some have accused the diplomatic community of being silent in the face of excesses by government and state authorities. Many would, hark back to the times of Smith Hempston and others, who came after that, who spoke out strongly against excesses by the government and the state, and who in certain cases aided those who had been persecuted by the state. And now people say that members of the diplomatic community, such as yourself, remain silent and not as supportive of the youth who are protesting, of members of civil society. Yeah. What would your response be?
So I disagree with that. We made a statement right after the June 25th protests. In fact, the heads of mission did it together. And we often do a statement together. During the elections in 2022, we did a lot of work together. I think the heads of mission are stronger together than we are alone. And then there's been 2 calls by our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to the president in the last month or so. Then the embassy, the U.S. embassy, made quite a strong statement around the middle of July. And then, of course, we had our Undersecretary of Human Rights, Civilian Security, and Democracy here for almost a week. And she gave a press conference and also issued a very strong statement about rule of law, holding those accountable for the violence to make sure that they were held accountable. So I would disagree that we have been silent.
But yet, in the wake of the protests, there was quite a bit of back and forth from the government as to who was responsible for, quote, sponsoring the protests. Madam Ambassador, the government and the president himself have accused an American organization, Ford Foundation, of sponsoring, quote, anarchy. The president himself saying, if they're going to sponsor violence in Kenya, if they're going to sponsor anarchy, we're going to call them out and we're going to tell them that they either style up or they leave. So Ford Foundation, an American organization that has had quite some work in this country for decades, standing accused of sponsoring anarchy in the country.
I thought that was wrong. I absolutely thought that was wrong. The Ford Foundation has worked in this country for almost 60 years. They support many, many civil society organizations. By the way, civil society is very important to democracy, alongside youth and religious leaders and others. And I've been quite vocal on this with the government. And we also had the Ford Foundation General Counsel and a couple of others here. And they are working through this. And I think that in the end, people will agree that the Ford Foundation had nothing to do with this. Of course, they fund civil society organizations. So does USAID, right? So does the Wellcome Trust. So does the Rockefeller Foundation. So I thought it was very inappropriate for the government to go after the Ford Foundation.
Okay. May I ask this question? Because you seem to have a good relationship with President William Ruto. And we've seen you talk and we've seen you have quite some rapport, since your posting here. Is this a conversation you have had with him privately? Would you tell us what it is you say to him about the events over the last few months, including those very strong allegations?
Yeah, so I meet not regularly with the president, but I do talk with him and, frankly, other members of government as well. The CSs in the first round and now the CSs in the second round. And we have very straightforward conversations on a number of different issues. I'm not going to share private conversations, but I can tell you we've been very clear and very frank about the core values that actually Kenya and the United States share. You are the leading democracy, probably on the continent, and we've been a democracy for 200 and some odd years and 255 years. And it's important that we compare notes and are very frank with each other about how we see the world.
And after the protest, then, the president made a couple of changes. He dropped the controversial finance bill that was at the heart of the protest at the time, and he made changes to his government. What are your thoughts about the actions following the protest?
Well, I think that he did make some changes as a direct result of the Gen Z protest. fraudsters. So you said it correctly. He pulled down the finance bill. He dismissed his entire cabinet. He replaced the head of the police and has talked about doing more on the key issues that the Gen Z had, which was efforts to combat corruption, efforts to jumpstart the economy and create more jobs. I mean, fundamentally, I think the core issue for the Gen Z was many things, but jobs. I mean, you've got a million students graduating from high school and college every year, and they're all not finding jobs that they deserve. And that creates a lot of tension. And he has said he's going to do things about corruption and jobs. So I think he's been listening. We have to see what actually transpires.
All right, but yet, some of the members of the cabinet were brought back. What were your thoughts on the vetting process that took place?
Well, I'll leave that up to the Kenyan government. There's quite a robust process of the cabinet members are nominated. They spend time in front of Parliament, and it's really up to Parliament to make the judgments about each and every one of the cabinet members.
Yeah, but yet in a tweet on the 1st of August, Madam Ambassador, you said, as Kenyans look ahead to the vetting of cabinet nominees beginning today, we recognize the importance of integrity in public service and the National Assembly's vital role in upholding Chapter 6 of the Constitution of Kenya. That was rather specific, talking about matters of integrity and accountability. Is there a reason you were very specific about that? Is there something you were particularly concerned about with the integrity of some of the nominees?
Not particularly about some of the nominees, although some may have issues, and hopefully they were fully vetted by the cabinet. What I will say is, as you know, I think Kenya has incredible potential. This is really the city on the shining hill in all of Africa in many ways. And but if Kenya is not to fulfill its full potential, my belief it will be because of pervasive corruption. And so I applaud Gen Z for bringing that issue to the fore. I applaud the government for actions that we believe they will take, we hope they will take. And this is a long-standing problem. It is a problem in every African country, many Latin American countries. Back in the day, it was a problem in the United States. But ultimately, corruption is a waste of resources. It doesn't give people the feeling of empowerment and the ability to control their own destiny. And in the end, I think Kenya has got to combat this.
Do you think enough has been done with respect to addressing the issues that came up after the protests? They were calling for jobs, better economy, but at the heart of it, they were also calling for good governance.
Yes.
And this conversation and adherence to the rule of law and the Constitution.
Yes.
And the conversation we're having with you today falls on the 14th anniversary of the Constitution of Kenya's
in 2010.
The promulgation. Yes, in 2010. And many Kenyans say it looks like we're back to where we were before. Whilst the cabinet was dismissed, half of them were brought back. There's other two who've been, put in as advisors. But then we've seen a number of issues in the country, including many of the key laws for the development tenets of the president have been declared unconstitutional. The president himself is on record in January this year saying he will defy court orders that he says get in the way of his development agenda. Where are we with this? And have we really reset the button, or many Kenyans feel we moved on? Members of the diplomatic community support the executive, but don't necessarily stand with the people.
So a lot of things in what you just said. That's okay. First of all, we do support a democratically elected president of your country. And here's the great news about a democracy. The country gets to make another decision if they want to in 2027. That's the great thing about democracy as opposed to autocratic leadership. There is a way to make change if Kenyans decide they want to do that. So that's the first point I would make. The second point is I can't really speak back to 2010. I was not here at that time. But what I will say is your Constitution, I think, as I said earlier, is excellent. And Kenya needs to enforce the Constitution and make sure that everything in there is brought to light and really is a part of everyday life. And I think Kenya has work to do there. As I said, every democracy is a work in process. This is never going to be done. It will never be perfect. The United States isn't perfect. France isn't perfect. No country is perfect. So you have to keep working at, as I said, a more perfect union.
All right.
And let's see what happens over the next, 4 to 6 months. I think it is, we're going to have to wait and see what happens and what the Gen Z continues to do and what the president and his administration does.
One of the key things that is happening, as you know, today, the government led by the president is launching or has launched the bid for Raila Odinga's campaign for the AU chairperson. What are your thoughts around this candidature and where Kenya stands in the African Union?
Yeah, so we don't take positions on elections and candidates. So this will be up to the government of Kenya and the people of Africa, or the African heads of state, or whoever votes on this leadership. Listen, I think the AU is a very important body and could even be more important than it is. One of the things that I think would benefit Africa tremendously is the Africa Free Trade Agreement. If this continent was a free trade continent, it would be one of, I think, the fourth largest free trading bloc in the world. And that would be enormously helpful to every single country. And as you know today, it's hard to move goods across state lines. There's different tariffs, there's different rules, there's different regulations, and a singular trading bloc. And I hope that would be, whoever is elected head of the AU, that would be one of their priorities. Not easy. There's, a lot of different states, but the AU could start with 20. And then see how it worked, and then other people might join. So I think perfection here is the enemy of really good.
Yeah, okay. That's an important quote to, I suppose, continue to remember. Let's talk about what's happening in Haiti. Do you have an update on that? How is that process going? And remind us again what the United States' obligation is in this arrangement between both countries.
Well, I think the international community is very grateful to Kenya to have agreed last summer to lead this MSS into Haiti. And they pretty much arrived around the middle of June. And I have to say, knock on wood, it's going very well. Remember, the president decided to send his police to Haiti because he said, you might remember that address, he said, they are Africans on a different continent. They are our brothers and sisters, and we must try to be helpful to the people of Haiti who live in a very difficult set of circumstances. And thus far, it's gone quite well. The Haitian National Police are working very closely with the Kenyan police. I think today or tomorrow, virtually all the equipment will have arrived to support the Kenyan troops. It would have been good if it had arrived a little sooner, but I think they've done a very nice job, and the commander on the ground, I think, is doing a very nice job.
And the U.S.'s obligation is?
The U.S. obligation. So we've contributed about $200 million of both products, or not products, but equipment, and also setting up the place where all the Kenyans are living, and then also helping to raise money from the international community that will go into the U.S., or that has already gone into the U.S. Trust Fund.
As you know, this was controversial here. There was even a court case against it. That was all cleared up, and they're now in the U.S. And many criticizing the U.S. for not having boots on the ground into what is, not an easy situation, but sending the Kenyans there.
Well,
Why do you not have boots on the ground for this
we didn't
particular
send
operation?
the Kenyans there by any means. It was really the international community that asked Kenya to do this. And as I said, the international community was very grateful. We have provided financial support, not only the equipment, but also actually $100 million. So we provided financial support. And then others are joining in from a boots on the ground, if you will. But we don't put boots on the ground in every instance. And this is one where we decided not to.
Okay. $100 million. Yet there is a report in the Daily Nation that families of police back home are yet to get their remuneration, their payment. Their children are not going to school. As you know, the school term is beginning this week. What's your response to that? Because this is very early on.
Yes.
And this is rather disheartening for the families.
I totally understand that. I was not aware of that until I saw the same report you did in the newspaper. So I've been checking with our people back in Washington, D.C., and what I understand is that they will get their remuneration on Thursday or Friday of this week. So that was unacceptable. That should not have happened. They should have gotten their remuneration from the day they landed in Haiti. So that was, error by omission, or I'm not sure exactly what happened, but we will make sure that that is made right.
Madam Ambassador, what would success look like in Haiti? When will we know that that moment has been reached, and what's the end game?
Yeah, well, remember the UN resolution to allow Kenyans to go to Haiti was in October of last year, and so there was a year-long period that we would see what would happen. Now, of course, the Kenyans didn't get there till June, so it's really June, July, August, September, October. So there's a checkpoint in October about what the next steps are for the police, the Kenyan police. So we will see. There could be a UN peacekeeping operation. There could be another bit of time that Kenya is asked to, maintain their presence there. We'll see. It should have been a full year from when the Kenyans arrived, but because of the delay, it's 5 months. So I think everyone will take stock, including the Kenyans, about what they think the right thing to do is here.
Okay, and success will look like?
I think success looks like, restoring peace and calm to a gang-torn, war-torn country that has had lots of challenges for many, many years. And I think that's where, to a large degree, that the Haitian police and the Kenyan police are working very well together, having secured the port, having secured some of downtown, having secured a number of different places. So I think it's going well. I mean, in fact, I know it's going well, but there's more work to do. So I think the Kenyans should be very proud of what the Kenyan police have done there, even if they weren't initially supporters. But the Haitian people, they need our support. It is a very difficult place to live.
I want us to get back to the country now, as we get towards the end of this conversation. The president of the Republic of Kenya is seeking a reform of the global financial architecture system. He says that has been skewed in favor of the West and to the disadvantage of Kenya and African countries, talking about the debt and the manner in which it is conducted, essentially having a chokehold and preventing, development. I would like to know your thoughts around this, particularly because some of those organizations that stand indicted, particularly even with the protests in the country, are not necessarily instruments of power of the U.S., but are heavily funded by the United States, and over which the United States has voting power, veto power, such as the IMF and the World Bank. And the IMF itself stands accused of asking the government to ignore the protests that they knew were, well and coming. What are your thoughts around this entire conversation when, the IMF told the state to ignore the protests that they had foreseen? And it would seem that this system tolerates or promotes the loss of lives over profit.
So what I would say first and foremost is every African country and Kenya face a very difficult financial situation. A lot of debt was taken on when interest rates were near zero. By the way, lots of companies around the world did the same thing because debt was effectively free. That debt built a lot of infrastructure, which I think Kenya is grateful to have. When you talk to people who haven't come to Kenya in 10 years, they're like, this is amazing. This is so different. But now, with what happened, and it's a very complicated situation, is when Russia invaded the Ukraine, inflation went up. The United States tried to control inflation. We raised interest rates. What I have understood is now that when we raise interest rates, we get a head cold, the rest of the world may get the flu.
Yeah.
So the percentage of the Kenyan budget that goes to interest and principal payment has increased dramatically. So now the question is, what can Kenya do? And it's true for many other African countries. And I think Kenya's number one priority is not to default. And I think that's very wise. So the IMF, the World Bank, bilateral lenders are now, Kenya, the good news, has a lot of friends that are trying to help solve this debt crisis, but there's no easy answer here. The IMF, and I don't speak for the IMF, yes, the United States is the largest shareholder of the IMF, but it's less than 20%. So many, many countries are voting around what the IMF will do. And as you know, the IMF was going to approve a disbursement around the 12th of June. But when the finance bill got pulled down, they could no longer do that because they have to have numbers that they can put into their models. So now that meeting, I believe, is going to be next week. And I think Kenya is well prepared for that meeting. We will see what happens. But it's important, I believe, for that disbursement to be given out because Kenya faces a very difficult situation. And the main way I think Kenya can move beyond this is to grow your way out, meaning create GDP growth greater than 5%, which is where you are this year. Also, make sure that they are good private sector or formal sector jobs, and really try to grow the GDP at 8% and create over 1 million new jobs a year, which is a tall order. But that's the main way out of this, I think, this debt squeeze.
Is the global financial system skewed against the Global South?
Well, I don't think it's intended to be skewed across the Global South. What I know is the Global South tends to be on the receiving end of higher interest rates. I mean, Kenya has among the highest interest rates. They're rolling, you guys are rolling debt now here with domestic lenders at close to 18%.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult. So I don't know if it's skewed against Kenya. It has a perhaps more deleterious effect than on other countries that are more developed in Western Europe or Asia.
All right. So there is something big happening in your country.
Yes, there
There's
is.
an election
There
coming
is.
up in November. What are your thoughts on how the race is shaping up for the rest of us who are watching and seeing the RNC and the DNC? It is now clear, who the candidates are.
Yes.
What is also clear is there certainly will be a change of leadership after November. What are your thoughts on that? Because you are a business woman.
Yes.
You are also a former politician.
Yes.
I don't know if there is such a thing as a former politician. You've run for office.
I ran for
before.
office. I think there is such a thing as a former politician.
Okay. It would be interesting to hear your thoughts on how what the race is looking like.
Yeah. Well, I have to be careful because as the U.S. ambassador, I can't take sides on this at all.
Right.
But it has certainly been an exciting time. I mean, more has happened in the last 2 months than anyone ever dreamed would happen. And it's quite remarkable with Biden stepping down, Kamala Harris securing the nomination. And now we have almost a record short period of time for this election to take place. Normally, we're a little bit like you. We campaign for months and months and months. This is not going to be that way.
Yeah.
So, as you said, we will certainly have a new leader. All the polls say this is a dead heat, and we will see what happens. People ask me, what do you think is going to happen, Meg?
Yeah.
And I'm like, my guess is as good as yours.
Can I get your personal reflections on the two candidates? Because you know them well.
Yes.
You know Kamala well.
Yes.
You know President Trump.
I actually know Kamala a little bit better because when I was running for governor, she was running for AG of the state of California.
That's right. What are your thoughts on these two candidates? Telling Kenyans about who they are, just your reflections.
Well, I think here's the good news. So much is written about these candidates that Kenyans can read the newspaper and really get a good sense of these two candidates. And they are quite different in their party, their style, their beliefs about what the right thing is for the United States. So it will be an interesting referendum that is in the hands of the United States of America, the people of the United States of America. And that's what democracy is all about. It can be a little messy, as you know, as we know, but every vote will be counted, and I have confidence that whoever wins will try to do the best job that they can do.
That is quite the diplomatic answer.
I've been trained well. I've been a diplomat now for 2 years.
Yeah, clearly you know how to get your way around that. I just wanted to see if we could get something from you about these two candidates and what happens in that race. But regardless of that, I think Kenyans would be keen to know what happens with the relationship between both countries after. I know even the talks around AGOA, which expires in September of 2025, Kenyans are keen to accelerate the talks and finalize on that before November. What are your thoughts around how this race and what happens after shapes the relationship between both countries? Well,
first, let me say that our relationship has withstood many, many presidents over the 60 years, Republicans, Democrats, and because I think fundamentally this is about people-to-people ties, about exchange programs, about health programs, about education, humanitarian aid. So I feel very confident that the relationship will remain strong. I think that I guess, the question is what will exactly happen? And it will depend on what is going on in the world. The world right now is very focused on Israel and Hamas, is very focused on Ukraine and Russia, very focused on, in our case, the southern border and immigration. So there's a lot going on. But as I said, I think the relationship will remain strong.
All right. AGOA, there's talks to extend it to 2041?
Well, there are talks to extend it for a good long time. I think there is bipartisan support in America for AGOA. We hope. I don't think it will get done before the election. I hope it will get done in what we call the lame duck session, which is after the election and before the new president is sworn in. And there's a lot of bipartisan support, both in the U.S. House of Representatives as well as the Senate. And Kenya has got a lot of good friends. Africa's got a lot of good friends that that really understand the benefit that has been provided to Africa writ large for AGOA. The other thing we're very focused on is the Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership. The negotiators were here a week or 10 days ago. There's another session in September, and I hope we can bring that to fruition by the end of the year as well. I think the last chapter that is still being negotiated is the labor chapter, which is of course, important to the Biden administration. But I have a confidence that we're going to get through that. And that would be fantastic for Kenya and, frankly, a model for that kind of trade agreement with other African countries.
Right. Thank you very much for your time, Ambassador Meg Whitman. It was a pleasure to have you here on The Explainer with us tonight.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.